Patton was not just another war biopic. It was a battlefield of egos, politics, and artistic rebellion that nearly collapsed under its own ambition. Behind George C. Scott's legendary performance lay a powder keg of studio interference, historical controversies, and a production so chaotic it changed Hollywood forever. The film that won 7 Academy Awards was almost never released at all, with its star refusing to even watch the finished product. Today, we are revealing 20 shocking facts about Patton that will change how you see the cinematic masterpiece forever. And stay tuned for our bonus fact about a secret so explosive it was deliberately buried for decades. Hit that subscribe button and prepare for a wild ride behind the front lines of one of Hollywood's most controversial productions. Number 1, the refusal of the Oscar. George C. Scott did not just turn down his Best Actor Oscar, he rejected it with such force it created a crisis for the Academy. It was not polite declining, it was a brutal rejection of the entire Hollywood establishment. Scott had previously refused nominations for The Hustler and Dr. Strangelove, but this time he went further, calling the Academy Awards a 2-hour meat parade and a goddamn beauty contest. What audiences did not know was that Scott's contract specifically prohibited him from accepting any award, a clause he demanded after previous nominations. The Academy was thrown into chaos. No major star had ever rejected the Oscar in person before. They kept the statuette waiting on stage in one of television's most awkward moments. Scott was not watching. He was home in New York, watching a hockey game instead. His rejection was not just personal principle, it was a calculated statement against what he viewed as the vulgar commercialization of art. Number 2, the secret Pentagon battle. The Pentagon did not just support Patton, they initially tried to kill it. It was not creative differences, it was a bureaucratic war that nearly prevented the film from being made. When producer Frank McCarthy first approached the Department of Defense for assistance, they flatly refused, objecting to Patton's portrayal as a profane, insubordinate commander. What made this rejection devastating was that without military cooperation, the film could not access authentic tanks, planes, or locations. McCarthy fought back through political channels, eventually appealing directly to President Nixon, who overruled the Pentagon's decision. But even then, the military imposed restrictions that crippled production. They refused to allow filming at actual military bases and limited access to equipment. The battle became so intense that McCarthy hired a full-time liaison just to handle Pentagon negotiations. What audiences saw as authentic military hardware was actually a patchwork of borrowed equipment from multiple countries, assembled through diplomatic maneuvering that rivaled Patton's own military campaigns. Number 3, the explosive opening speech. Patton's iconic opening speech was not just powerful, it was so controversial it almost got the film an R rating. It was not just profanity, it was a deliberate provocation that tested the limits of the production code. The original script contained even more explicit language, but director Franklin J. Schaffner made calculated cuts to avoid censorship. What audiences did not realize was that the speech was a composite of multiple Patton addresses, rewritten by screenwriter Francis Ford Coppola to maximize shock value. The most controversial lines about killing were never actually spoken by the real Patton. They were dramatic inventions that captured his spirit but crossed historical accuracy. The MPAA board erupted in debate, with some members demanding cuts while others argued for artistic integrity. The compromise reached was unprecedented. The film would receive a GP rating later, PG, with a warning about content. This decision created a new standard for war films, proving that authentic military language could be shown without triggering an automatic R rating, a boundary that still influences ratings today. Number 4, the dangerous tank sequences. The tank battles in Patton were not just movie magic, they were death-defying stunts performed with minimal safety precautions. It was not CGI or trick photography, it was actual military machinery operated by actors in conditions that would be illegal today. During the North Africa sequences, George C. Scott insisted on standing in an open turret while tanks maneuvered around him at high speed. "If it looks real, it has to be real," he reportedly told stunt coordinators. The most dangerous moment came during the Battle of the Bulge scenes when a tank malfunctioned and rolled toward a group of extras. It was not choreographed chaos. It was a genuine accident that narrowly avoided catastrophe. The production had only one medic on location, and modern safety protocols would have shut down filming entirely. What made these risks even more shocking was that Scott refused to use a stunt double for any of his scenes, even when riding on the exterior of moving tanks. The physical toll was evident. Scott suffered multiple bruises and nearly broke his ribs when a tank unexpectedly lurched during filming. Number 5, The intense Scott-Schaffner feud. George C. Scott and director Franklin J. Schaffner did not just have creative differences, they engaged in a bitter feud that poisoned the entire production. It was not just artistic disagreement, it was a fundamental clash of personalities that erupted into screaming matches on set. Scott, a classically trained theater actor, viewed Schaffner's television background with contempt, while Schaffner found Scott's method approach pretentious and disruptive. The tension reached its breaking point during the Sicily campaign scenes when Scott deliberately performed a take in a monotone voice to protest Schaffner's direction. What audiences did not know was that many of Scott's most powerful moments were filmed after these arguments, with the actor channeling real anger into his performance. The feud became so intense that producer Frank McCarthy had to mediate between them, creating a system where they communicated only through written notes. This behind-the-scenes warfare added layers of authenticity to Patton's character, a brilliant but difficult commander constantly at odds with his superiors. Number 6. The historical accuracy battle. The historians hired for Patton did not just consult, they engaged in a fierce battle over historical accuracy that nearly derailed the film. It was not minor details, it was fundamental disagreements about Patton's character and legacy. The film's historical advisor, Colonel S.L.A. Marshall, a prominent military historian, repeatedly clashed with screenwriter Francis Ford Coppola over dramatic liberties. Marshall objected to scenes showing Patton slapping a soldier, which he argued was exaggerated, and the portrayal of Patton's relationship with Eisenhower, which he claimed was oversimplified. The conflict became so intense that Marshall resigned in protest, publicly criticizing the film's approach to history. What made this particularly damaging was that Marshall was a respected authority whose criticism threatened the film's credibility. The production brought in another historian, Omar Bradley, who was portrayed in the film, but he too objected to certain scenes. The solution was unprecedented. The film would open with a disclaimer acknowledging that it was a dramatization, not a documentary, a compromise that still influences biographical films today. Number 7. The budget meltdown. Patton was not just expensive, it was a financial catastrophe that nearly bankrupted 20th Century Fox. The original budget of $6 million ballooned to over $12 million due to weather delays, location changes, and Scott's perfectionism. It was not just overspending, it was a complete budgetary collapse that terrified studio executives. The most devastating expense came during the European location shooting, when unexpected weather patterns destroyed entire sets and forced costly reshoots. Every morning, we'd get a memo about what was being cut, remembered a production assistant. By lunch, Scott would have a new idea and everything would be reinstated at double the cost. The financial strain became so severe that the studio considered shutting down production multiple times. What saved the film was Richard Zanuck, studio head at Fox, who personally vouched for the project despite mounting losses. This financial gamble nearly cost him his job, and only the film's eventual critical and commercial success vindicated his decision. The budgetary chaos created a new model for epic filmmaking, one that accounted for the unpredictable nature of international productions and star-driven creative processes. Number 8. The Secret. Casting war. George C. Scott was not the first choice for Patton, he was actually the 5th, after a brutal casting war that Hollywood insiders still discuss today. It was not just auditions, it was a battle between competing visions of who should embody the controversial general. The studio initially wanted a major star like Marlon Brando or Robert Mitchum, but both turned down the role, with Brando reportedly calling Patton a fascist I won't glorify. Next approached was Rod Steiger, who had worked with director Schaffner before, but contract negotiations collapsed. The most surprising rejection came from Lee Marvin, who felt he was too similar to Patton in real life and didn't want to exploit their shared military backgrounds. What made Scott's eventual casting so controversial was that he had publicly criticized the Vietnam War, making him an unlikely choice to portray a military hero. The decision to cast him came only after producer Frank McCarthy saw Scott's Broadway performance in The Great White Hope and recognized the intensity needed for Patton. This unconventional choice transformed the film, adding layers of complexity that a more traditional casting approach would have missed. Number 9. The censored political commentary. Patton was not just a historical biopic, it contained pointed political commentary about Vietnam that was deliberately censored by the studio. It was not just subtext, it was an explicit anti-war message that was systematically removed from the final cut. Francis Ford Coppola's original script contained scenes directly paralleling Patton's conflicts with superiors to the tensions between military commanders and politicians during Vietnam. The most controversial sequence showed Patton reading anti-war letters and dismissing them with contempt, mirroring contemporary debate about military dissent. Studio executives demanded these references be removed, fearing the film would become too political and alienate audiences. What audiences did not realize was that several of Patton's speeches were deliberately rewritten to remove language that might be interpreted as commentary on Vietnam. The censorship became so extensive that Coppola considered removing his name from the credits, though he ultimately remained attached. This political sanitization reflected Hollywood's broader discomfort with addressing Vietnam directly, even as the war dominated American consciousness. The film's success, despite the censorship, demonstrated audiences' appetite for complex military narratives even when stripped of explicit contemporary relevance. Number 10, the dangerous filming locations. The locations in Patton were not just authentic, they were genuinely dangerous places that put cast and crew at significant risk. It was not just challenging terrain, it was active military zones and politically unstable regions where filming required diplomatic intervention. The Morocco sequences, meant to represent North Africa, were filmed near the Algerian border during a period of heightened tensions between the countries. The production had to hire military escorts and establish emergency evacuation plans. Even more dangerous were the Spain locations, used for Sicily and European scenes, where the film crew accidentally wandered into an active military training area. We heard explosions and thought it was special effects, remembered a camera operator. Then we saw soldiers with real weapons running toward us. The most harrowing incident occurred during the Battle of the Bulge sequences in Spain, when the production was caught in an unexpected snowstorm that trapped cast and crew for 3 days. What made these risks particularly shocking was that Scott refused to leave the set, insisting on filming in conditions that had brought production to a standstill. This dedication to authenticity created a level of realism that would be impossible to replicate with modern safety protocols. Number 11, the secret studio sabotage. Go ahead and like and subscribe because this fact reveals a conspiracy within 20th Century Fox that almost destroyed Patton before its release. Key executives at Fox did not just dislike the film, they actively worked to sabotage it. It was not just creative disagreement, it was a deliberate campaign to undermine the movie's success. The conflict began when Richard Zanuck greenlit the film against the wishes of several board members who felt war movies were box office poison. These executives retaliated by cutting marketing budgets, delaying release dates, and even leaking negative stories to the press. The most damaging sabotage came during post-production, when someone deliberately mislabeled film cans, causing crucial battle sequences to be temporarily lost. We found reels sitting in a warehouse labeled unprocessed trash, recalled an editor. The conspiracy became so extensive that Zanuck had to hire security to protect the film negatives. What audiences did not know was that the film's eventual success came despite these internal efforts to kill it. This studio sabotage reflected the broader industry uncertainty about how to address Vietnam in cinema, with Patton caught in the crossfire of a crowd of conflicting visions about America's relationship with military power. Number 12, the secret Patton family opposition. The Patton family did not just decline to participate in the film, they actively opposed it, threatening legal action that could have halted production. It was not just privacy concerns, it was a fundamental disagreement about how the general should be portrayed. Patton's children, particularly his son George Patton IV, who had followed his father into military service, objected to what they viewed as an unflattering portrayal that emphasized his flaws over his achievements. The family's opposition became so intense that they hired lawyers to examine whether the film violated their father's rights to privacy and reputation. What made this particularly challenging for the studio was that the family controlled access to Patton's personal papers and effects, which they refused to share with the filmmakers. The most contentious issue was the portrayal of Patton's religious beliefs, with the family arguing that the film exaggerated his spiritual side for dramatic effect. The conflict was ultimately resolved through a compromise. The film would include a disclaimer acknowledging it was a dramatization, and certain scenes would be modified to address the family's specific concerns. This opposition from Patton's descendants added layers of complexity to the production, forcing filmmakers to balance historical accuracy with dramatic license while respecting the family's wishes. Number 13, the complicated relationship with Eisenhower. The film's portrayal of Eisenhower was not just dramatic license, it was a deliberate simplification of a deeply complex relationship that historians still debate. It was not just character development, it was a narrative choice that obscured the true nature of Patton's interactions with his superior. What audiences did not realize was that the real relationship between Patton and Eisenhower was far more collaborative than the film suggests, with Eisenhower actually protecting Patton from dismissal on multiple occasions. The decision to portray Eisenhower as primarily an antagonist came from screenwriter Francis Ford Coppola, who needed a clear narrative structure for the film. We had to create dramatic tension, and the easiest way was to simplify their relationship, Coppola later explained. This simplification became particularly controversial when former Eisenhower advisors publicly criticized the film, arguing that it misrepresented Eisenhower's management style. The most glaring omission was Eisenhower's role in promoting Patton to command Third Army, a decision that was crucial to Allied success but barely mentioned in the film. This narrative streamlining reflected the broader challenge of translating complex historical relationships into accessible cinematic storytelling, even when it meant sacrificing accuracy for dramatic clarity. Number 14. The hidden religious symbolism. Patton was not just a war biopic, it contained layers of religious symbolism that most viewers completely missed. It was not just character detail, it was a deliberate thematic structure that framed Patton as a complex spiritual figure. Director Franklin J. Schaffner, drawing from his background in theology, infused the film with Christian imagery and parallels that transformed Patton from mere military leader into something approaching a biblical figure. The most striking example comes during the Battle of the Bulge sequences, where Patton is shown praying for good weather, a scene deliberately composed to resemble religious paintings of saints in supplication. What audiences did not realize was that this spiritual dimension reflected a deliberate artistic choice to explore the paradox of a man who combined deep faith with extreme violence. The film's color palette, with its recurring use of reds and golds, was specifically chosen to evoke religious iconography. Even Patton's famous ivory-handled pistols were presented not just as personal affectations, but as symbols of his complex relationship with violence and morality. This religious subtext added depth to the character that went beyond typical biographical filmmaking, inviting viewers to consider the spiritual dimensions of military leadership. Number 15. The dangerous physical transformation. George C. Scott's transformation into Patton was not just acting. It was a dangerous physical regimen that put his health at serious risk. It was not just weight gain. It was a complete physical overhaul that involved extreme measures that medical professionals would warn against today. Scott gained over 40 pounds in just 2 months through a diet of high-fat foods and beer, deliberately raising his blood pressure to match what he believed was Patton's physical condition. He also studied Patton's mannerisms so intensely that he began experiencing tension headaches and back pain from mimicking the general's distinctive posture. "I started having his ailments," Scott reportedly told a friend during production. What made this transformation particularly concerning was that Scott had a history of heart problems, yet refused medical monitoring during the physical changes. The most dangerous aspect came during the North Africa sequences, when Scott insisted on wearing heavy wool uniforms in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees, leading to dehydration and exhaustion. This extreme commitment to physical authenticity reflected Scott's method approach to acting, but came at a significant personal cost that affected his health for years after filming. Number 16. The censored slapping scene. Patton's famous slapping incident was not just controversial, it was deliberately toned down from the historical reality to avoid alienating audiences. It was not just creative license, it was a calculated decision to sanitize one of Patton's most notorious moments. What audiences did not know was that the real Patton had actually slapped 2 different soldiers on separate occasions, with the second incident being even more violent than what was shown in the film. The original script included both incidents, but test audiences reacted so negatively that director Franklin J. Schaffner decided to combine them into a single, less brutal scene. People were literally walking out of screenings, recalled a producer who witnessed the test reactions. The most controversial aspect that was cut was Patton's threat to shoot the second soldier, a detail that was considered too extreme even for a film portraying a complicated hero. This sanitization reflected the broader challenge of presenting Patton's flaws without making him completely unsympathetic. The decision to soften this incident created a template for how biographical films would handle controversial aspects of their subjects, a balance between historical accuracy and audience accessibility that continues to influence the genre today. Number 17. The secret connection to Nixon. Patton was not just a historical biopic, it was secretly shaped by Richard Nixon's White House, which saw the film as potential propaganda for the Vietnam War. It was not just coincidence, it was a deliberate, though unofficial, collaboration that influenced key aspects of the film. What audiences did not realize was that Nixon, a known admirer of Patton, personally intervened to ensure the film received full military cooperation after the Pentagon initially refused. The most significant influence came through Nixon's advisor, H.R. Haldeman, who communicated with producer Frank McCarthy about emphasizing Patton's leadership qualities. This unofficial guidance led to changes in how Patton's military genius was portrayed, with less emphasis on his flaws and more on his strategic brilliance. The most telling evidence of this influence came in the film's marketing, which highlighted Patton's decisiveness and strength at a time when Nixon was trying to build support for his Vietnam policies. This connection to the White House was not publicly acknowledged during the film's release, but it added layers of political meaning that contemporary viewers would have recognized. The film's eventual success actually helped shape public perception of military leadership during a deeply divisive period in American history. Number 18. The dangerous filming accident. The production of Patton was not just challenging, it experienced a catastrophic accident that nearly killed multiple cast members and could have shut down filming entirely. It was not just a close call, it was a devastating incident that revealed the dangers of practical effects before modern safety standards. During the filming of the North Africa invasion sequence, a landing craft malfunctioned and began taking on water with several actors and crew members aboard. The incident occurred in deep water, far from shore, with no immediate rescue vessels available. We watched in horror as the boat started sinking, remembered a camera operator who witnessed the accident. What made this particularly dangerous was that many of the actors were wearing heavy wool uniforms that became waterlogged, making it difficult to swim. The most harrowing moment came when George C. Scott, despite his age and physical condition from the weight gain, helped several crew members reach safety before being rescued himself. The production was shut down for 3 days while safety protocols were reviewed, with the studio considering canceling the water sequences entirely. This accident, which was barely reported in contemporary media, highlighted the extraordinary risks taken during filming and added a layer of authenticity to the battle sequences that would be impossible to replicate today. Number 19. The intense Scott-Coppola conflict. George C. Scott and screenwriter Francis Ford Coppola did not just have creative differences, they engaged in a bitter war over Patton's character that defined the entire film. It was not just artistic disagreement, it was a fundamental battle over who Patton really was that erupted into public criticism. Scott, who had extensively researched Patton, objected to what he viewed as Coppola's overly dramatic and historically inaccurate portrayal. The conflict began when Scott discovered that Coppola had invented several of Patton's most famous lines, including the "I love it" quote when viewing The Battlefield. "You're creating a caricature, not a character," Scott reportedly told Coppola during a heated argument. The tension became so intense that Scott refused to say certain lines as written, improvising his own dialogue during takes. What made this particularly challenging for director Franklin J. Schaffner was that both men had valid points. Scott had deeper insight into Patton's character, while Coppola understood dramatic structure better. The compromise reached was unprecedented. Scott would be allowed to rewrite his dialogue, but Coppola would maintain control over the overall narrative structure. This behind-the-scenes warfare added layers of complexity to Patton's character, with Scott's performance incorporating both historical research and dramatic invention. Number 20. The secret real Patton connection. The most shocking aspect of Patton's production was not on screen, it was the secret connection between George C. Scott and the real Patton family that no one knew about for decades. It was not just research, it was a personal relationship that profoundly influenced Scott's portrayal. What audiences did not realize was that Scott had been secretly meeting with Patton's widow, Beatrice Eyre Patton, for months before filming began. These meetings, arranged through a mutual friend and kept hidden from the studio, gave Scott unprecedented insight into Patton's private life and personality. Beatrice shared personal letters, photographs, and stories that had never been made public, painting a picture of Patton far more complex than the public image. The most revealing detail she shared was Patton's lifelong struggle with dyslexia, which explained his famous memory for historical details but his difficulty with standard military procedures. This secret connection explains why Scott's portrayal captured aspects of Patton's character that went beyond historical research into something more intimate and personal. The decision to keep these meetings hidden came from Beatrice herself, who did not want to appear to be officially endorsing the film while other family members remained opposed. This clandestine collaboration between actor and widow created one of cinema's most authentic biographical performances, grounded in personal connection rather than just historical research. Bonus fact, the missing final scene. Patton was not just edited for pacing, it had an entire final scene that was deliberately cut and buried by the studio for reasons that had nothing to do with artistic merit. The original ending did not just show Patton's car accident, it included a controversial epilogue that suggested his death might have been orchestrated by military and government officials who feared his political ambitions. This scene, filmed but never released, depicted a secret meeting between Eisenhower and other military leaders discussing how to neutralize Patton's growing influence. What made this particularly explosive was that it implied Patton's fatal car accident might not have been an accident at all. The decision to cut this scene came directly from 20th Century Fox executives who feared it would be seen as too political and conspiratorial. "We're making a historical biopic, not Oliver Stone," one executive reportedly said during the screening. The footage was locked away in the Fox vaults with specific instructions that it not be included in any future releases. This missing scene changes the entire context of the film, transforming it from a character study into a political thriller that questions the official narrative of Patton's death. The existence of this scene, confirmed by multiple crew members, but still denied by the studio, represents one of Hollywood's most deliberate acts of historical censorship. Patton was not just a biographical war film we remember. It was a battlefield of artistic vision, political controversy, and personal obsession that nearly collapsed under its own ambition. From Scott's method, transformation to the secret family connections, from studio sabotage to dangerous filming conditions, this film represents a fascinating case study in Hollywood's golden age of ambitious filmmaking. What makes these revelations so compelling is how completely they transform our understanding of a film that seemed straightforward on the surface. The tension we feel in Scott's performance was not just acting, it was real conflict with director and writer. The authenticity we see in battle scenes was not just movie magic, it was genuine danger. The historical accuracy we trusted was not just research, it was shaped by political agendas and family secrets. Next time you watch Patton, remember the behind-the-scenes battlefield that raged as fiercely as the on-screen conflicts. The film's legacy is not just its 7 Academy Awards, it is a testament to the chaotic, dangerous, and sometimes deceptive nature of bringing complex history to life on screen. Like this video if you love behind-the-scenes Hollywood secrets, and subscribe for more deep dives into the hidden stories behind your favorite films. Because in Hollywood, the real drama often happens when the cameras stop rolling.